Hey guys, tonight we dive into the muddy, deafening chaos of World War I's most brutal battles, where you'll trudge through trenches, dodge shells, and feel the weight of history's deadliest war. Picture yourself knee-deep in sludge, the air thick with smoke and the roar of artillery shaking your bones. You're not just hearing about the Great War, you're in it. And honestly, you probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your city and local time. I'm curious where you're drifting off from tonight. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're in the Somme Valley. July 1916, and the ground is a churned-up nightmare. The Battle of the Somme, one of the war's bloodiest, kicks off with a week-long artillery barrage, over 1.7 million shells fired. Enough to make your ears bleed just thinking about it. You're crouched in a British trench, the walls slimy with mud, as whistles blow and men clamber over the top. The first day alone sees 57,000 British casualties, a number so staggering it's hard to wrap your head around. You're scrambling through barbed wire, machine guns chattering like angry hornets, and you're wondering how anyone keeps going. A quirky tidbit: some soldiers carried trench rabbits, pet bunnies, for luck, though a rabbit's foot didn't stop a bullet. Historians still argue whether the Somme's massive losses were a tragic necessity or a pointless slaughter driven by stubborn generals. The air smells of wet earth and cordite, and you're slipping in the muck, trying to keep your rifle dry. The Germans opposite you are dug in deep, their Maxim guns spitting death across no man's land. You're dodging craters big enough to swallow a horse, each one filled with water and worse. The British plan was to smash German lines with artillery, then walk in. Spoiler, it didn't work. You're running now, heart pounding, as shells burst overhead, showering you with dirt. A mate next to you stumbles, and you don't look back. Hesitation's a death sentence here. A grim chuckle hits you. Why don't some soldiers play chess? Because the board would be mud, and every move's a checkmate. You're not alone in this hell. Thousands of men, British, French, German, hurl themselves into the grinder. The Somme's not just a battle. It's a 5-month meat grinder, chewing up over 1 million men by November. You're weaving through shattered trees, the Beaumont-Hamel sector, a maze of wire and bodies. Some soldiers, desperate, use shovels as weapons when their rifles jam. You're picturing a modern war movie. All slick effects. This is rawer, dirtier, the kind of chaos that sticks in your nightmares. Another joke: what's a trench soldier's favorite song? Anything loud enough to drown out the shells. Night falls, and you're back in the trench, the cold seeping into your bones. Rats scurry over your boots, fat from scavenging. You're sharing a cigarette with a Tommy, his face smudged with mud, eyes hollow. The artillery's quieter now, but the tension's thick. Another push comes at dawn. You're wondering how these men kept their sanity, writing letters home between bombardments. A quirky story floats up: some soldiers brewed tea in their helmets, because even in hell, Brits need their cuppa. You're thinking of those Viking raids from that other history trip, Wild, but at least they got to sail away. Here, you're stuck. The mud your only constant. The stars are hidden by smoke, and you're huddled under a tattered blanket, the distant thump of guns lulling you into uneasy rest. The Somme not just a battle. It's a symbol of war's futility, where gains are measured in yards and paid for in lives. You're exhausted, your boots soaked, but the men around you are already bracing for tomorrow. Another dark joke. What's a Somme veteran's favorite hobby? Digging, because it's all they ever did. You're starting to see why this battle haunts history, and you're just hoping to make it through the night. You've clawed your way out of the Somme's muddy hell, the echo of artillery fading as you find yourself in the shattered landscape of Verdun. February 1916. You're stumbling through a French trench, the air thick with smoke and the stench of burning metal. The ground shakes with relentless German barrages, each blast rattling your teeth. You're clutching a rifle, your hands numb, as French soldiers shout, "Ils ne passeront pas." They shall not pass. Verdun's a meat grinder, and you're wondering if you'll make it through the day or just become another name on a memorial. The Battle of Verdun, raging from February to December 1916, is one of World War I's longest and deadliest, with nearly 1 million casualties. The Germans aim to bleed France dry, targeting this fortress city for its symbolic weight. You're dodging shrapnel now, the Douaumont fort a smoldering ruin ahead, its walls crumbling under 4 20mm howitzer shells. Each explosion feels personal, like the earth itself wants you gone. A quirky tidbit, some soldiers swore they saw ghosts in the fog. Fallen comrades wandering the battlefield, probably just shell shock talking. Historians still argue whether Verdun's defense was a heroic stand or a senseless obsession with holding ground at any cost. You're scrambling through a trench, the walls collapsing under another barrage. Mud sucks at your boots, and you're tripping over abandoned gear helmets, rifles, a stray canteen. The French are fighting like demons, their blue coats stained black with soot. You see a poilu, a French infantryman, firing his Lebel rifle until it jams, then swinging it like a club. You're thinking of those Somme trench rabbits here. Even the rats look too scared to stick around. A grim chuckle hits you. Why don't Verdun's soldiers play cards? The deck would get blown to Belgium before the first deal. The German strategy is brutal pound Verdun until France breaks. You're weaving through a cratered field, the air hissing with shells called Jack Johnsons for their black smoke, like a boxer's punch. Your ears ring, and you're coughing on cordite fumes. The French counter with their own artillery, turning the battlefield into a moonscape. You're ducking into a dugout, its roof sagging, as a sergeant barks orders in frantic French. You're wondering how anyone keeps track of who's winning when the ground itself is the enemy. Another joke, what's a Verdun soldier's favorite meal? Anything that doesn't taste like mud. The fighting's relentless, day and night. You're crawling through a communication trench, passing wounded men moaning for water. Some sectors, like the Mortholm Hill, change hands so often you lose count. The Germans use flamethrowers' liquid fire that makes you rethink every nightmare you've ever had. You're picturing those Viking longships, all speed and escape. Here, there's nowhere to run. A soldier next to you clutches a rosary, praying between shots. You're hoping faith's enough, but the screams suggest otherwise. Night creeps in, and you're huddled in a shell hole, the cold biting through your coat. The artillery's a constant drum, like a heartbeat you can't shake. You're sharing a stale biscuit with a French gunner, his face gray with exhaustion. A quirky story floats up: some troops carve their names into shells, hoping to sign their shots. You're thinking of that Psalm tea and helmets trick here. They'd probably drink the mud just to stay awake. The stars are invisible, choked by smoke. And you're wondering how anyone sleeps in this inferno. The battle drags on, month after month. You're back in the trench, dodging a fresh wave of gas shells, chlorine, maybe, burning your throat. Gas masks are clumsy, fogging up, and you're fumbling to get yours on. The French hold Verdun, but at a cost that makes your stomach churn. 300,000 dead, maybe more. You're starting to see why this battle's a symbol of endurance, not victory. Another dark joke. What's a Verdun veteran's favorite hobby, counting scars? Because they've got plenty. You're exhausted, your body aching. But the guns don't stop, and neither do the men around you. Dawn's coming, and with it, another day of hell. You've staggered out of Verdun's relentless inferno. The artillery's roar fading as you find yourself scrambling up the rocky cliffs of Gallipoli. April 1915. The air smells of salt and gunpowder. Waves crashing below as you cling to a jagged slope under Turkish fire. You're with Allied troops, mostly Anzacs, Australians, and New Zealanders storming beaches under a blistering sun. Bullets pinging off rocks like angry wasps. Your boots slip on shale, and you're wondering if you'll reach the top or just tumble into the sea. The Gallipoli campaign, launched to seize the Dardanelles and open a route to Russia, becomes a brutal 8-month slog, with over 250,000 Allied casualties. You're at Anzac Cove, where troops land under machine gun fire. The cliffs offering no cover. The Turks, dug in above, rain down bullets and grenades, turning the beach into a slaughterhouse. A quirky tidbit, some Anzacs used jammed tin bombs, homemade explosives, when supplies ran low, like a deadly craft project. Historians still argue whether Gallipoli was a bold strategic gamble or a doomed miscalculation by Allied planners. You're clawing up the slope. A digger next to you cursing in a thick Aussie accent. His bayonet's fixed. But it's no match for the Turkish snipers picking off anyone who moves. The heat's brutal, your canteen's dry, and you're dodging shrapnel that kicks up dust like tiny geysers. You're thinking of Verdun's muddy trenches, at least there you could hide. Here, the cliffs expose you like a sitting duck. A grim chuckle hits you. Why don't Gallipoli soldiers play hide and seek? Because the cliffs rat you out every time. The fighting's relentless, a vertical war. You see Anzacs charge up Chunuk Bair, only to be mowed down before they reach the ridge. The Turks counterattack, rolling boulders down slopes, nature's own artillery. You're weaving through scrub, thorns snagging your uniform as a mate collapses, hit by a sniper. You drag him to a shallow ditch, but medics are nowhere near. You're picturing those Somme trench rabbits here. The only pets are the flies swarming everything. Another joke, what's an Anzac's favorite beach vacation? Anywhere but Gallipoli. The campaign's a logistical disaster. You're hauling ammo crates up a ravine. Your back screaming, while supply ships bob uselessly offshore. Water's rationed, and dysentery's spreading faster than rumors. You're wondering how the Turks keep fighting. Their trenches just as miserable, but better positioned. Some Anzacs carve crude dugouts into the cliffs, calling them Anzac hotels, a grim kind of optimism. You're hoping for a break, but the constant crack of rifles says otherwise. Night falls, and you're crouched in a shallow trench. The sea's rhythm drowned out by gunfire. The air's thick with dust and despair. And you're sharing a cigarette with a Kiwi soldier, his face caked with sweat and dirt. A quirky story floats up. Some troops played cricket on the beach between attacks, as if a quick game could pause the war. You're thinking of Verdun's ghost stories here. The only spirits are the ones soldiers drink to forget. The stars gleam faintly, but the cliffs loom like silent judges. You're back on the move at dawn. The Turks shelling from above. The campaign drags on, with trenches creeping up hills, only to be lost again. You're dodging a machine gun burst, your heart pounding as you dive behind a rock. The Anzac's spirit is fierce, but the cliffs and Turkish fire are fiercer. Another dark joke. What's a Gallipoli soldier's favorite song? One that drowns out the sound of snipers. You're exhausted, your hands raw from climbing, but the fight's far from over. Gallipoli's not just a battle, it's a graveyard of ambition, and you're just trying to stay alive until the evacuation. You've clambered down from Gallipoli's bloodied cliffs, the sea's roar fading as you stumble into the shattered fields of Ypres. October 1914. The air chokes with a sickly green haze, chlorine gas, and you're fumbling for a gas mask. Your lungs burning. You're in a Belgian trench, mud sucking at your boots, as German shells scream overhead. British and Belgian soldiers huddle nearby, coughing, their eyes wide with panic. You're wondering if you'll survive the next gas cloud or just choke in this toxic hell. The First Battle of Ypres, part of a series stretching to 1918, marks the war's early trench stalemate, with over 150,000 Allied casualties by November 1914. You're in the salient, a bulge of Allied lines surrounded by Germans, where every inch is fought over with bullets and bayonets. The gas, first used widely here by 1915, turns the air into a weapon, blinding and suffocating. A quirky tidbit, early gas masks were just urine-soaked rags. Soldiers literally held their breath and hoped. Historians still argue whether gas was a game changer or just a cruel twist in an already brutal war. You're scrambling through a trench, the walls crumbling as shells burst nearby. Your mask's cloth is damp, fogging your vision, and you're tripping over a tangle of barbed wire and abandoned rifles. A Tommy next to you clutches his Lee Enfield, firing blindly into the fog. You're thinking of Gallipoli's open cliffs here. The trenches feel like a coffin, but at least they're cover. A grim chuckle hits you. Why don't Ypres soldiers play poker? The air's too thick to see the cards. The gas is relentless, drifting in yellow-green clouds that sting your eyes even through the mask. You see men collapse, clawing at their throats, while others charge into the haze, bayonets fixed, as if courage can outrun poison. The Germans push hard, their machine guns rattling across no man's land. You're dodging a burst, diving into a dugout where a Belgian sergeant barks orders, his voice muffled by his mask. You're wondering how anyone fights when breathing's a gamble. Another joke, what's a Ypres soldier's favorite scent? Anything that isn't chlorine. The salient's a death trap, with Germans shelling from three sides. You're hauling ammo crates through mud, your arms aching, as rain turns the trench into a soup. Corpses float in flooded craters, and you're trying not to look. The British hold the line, barely, their artillery answering with deafening roars. You're picturing those Somme trench rabbits here. The rats are bolder, feasting in plain sight. Some soldiers whisper about deserting. But where do you go when hell's all around? Night falls, and you're crouched in a waterlogged trench. The gas fading, but the fear lingering. The air smells of decay and chemicals. And you're sharing a soggy biscuit with a soldier who's muttering about home. A quirky story floats up some troops tied bells to barbed wire to hear German sappers sneaking up medieval tactics in a modern war. You're thinking of Verdun's ghost rumors here. The only ghosts are the men still standing, haunted by what they've seen. The stars are hidden by smoke, and you're shivering, your boots soaked through. You're back in the fight at dawn. The Germans launching another gas attack. You're pulling your mask tighter, praying it holds. As shells churn the ground into mud, the line holds. But at a cost, thousands dead. Thousands more scarred by gas. You're starting to see why Ypres became a byword for suffering. Its name heavy with loss. Another dark joke, what's a Ypres veteran's favorite hobby? Breathing. Because it's never guaranteed. You're exhausted, your lungs stinging. But the war grinds on, and you're just trying to survive the next cloud. You've staggered out of Ypres' toxic haze. The sting of chlorine fading as you find yourself in the dense forests of East Prussia. August 1914. You're running with a Russian column, the air heavy with pine and panic, as German machine guns chatter in the distance. The Battle of Tannenberg is unfolding, and you're caught in a German ambush. The ground littered with shattered rifles and fleeing soldiers. Your boots crunch on pine needles, and you're wondering if you'll outrun the trap or just collapse in the chaos. The Battle of Tannenberg, fought from August 26 to 30, 1914, is a German masterstroke, annihilating Russia's Second Army with over 50,000 casualties and 92,000 prisoners. You're in the thick of it, dodging bullets as German forces under Hindenburg and Ludendorff exploit Russian missteps. The Russians, overconfident, march into a trap, their radios broadcasting unencrypted orders, practically handing the Germans a playbook. A quirky tidbit, some Russian soldiers carried icons into battle. Believing divine protection trumped artillery, historians still argue whether Tannenberg's outcome was due to German brilliance or Russian blunders. You're sprinting beside a Cossack, his saber useless against the German Maxims, spitting death from hidden ridges. The forest is a maze, trees splintering under shell fire, and you're tripping over roots in abandoned packs. You're thinking of Ypres' gas clouds. At least there you had trenches to hide in. Here, the open woods offer no mercy. A grim chuckle hits you. Why don't Tannenberg's soldiers play tag? Because the Germans always catch you. The Germans' encirclement is relentless. You see Russian units scatter, some charging blindly, others surrendering in droves. Artillery roars, turning clearings into craters, and you're dodging shrapnel that slices through pines like paper. Your rifle's jammed with dirt, and you're cursing the mud that's more enemy than the Germans. A Russian officer shouts orders, but half his men are already running. You're wondering how anyone keeps fighting when the plan's fallen apart. Another joke, what's a Russian soldier's favorite map? One that shows an exit. The chaos is suffocating. You're weaving through a burning village, its thatched roofs blazing as Germans advance. Some Russians fight to the last, bayonets flashing. But most are overwhelmed, their lines broken by precise German maneuvers. You're picturing Gallipoli's cliffs brutal, but at least they had the sea, Here, the forest feels like a closing trap. A soldier next to you clutches a bleeding arm, muttering prayers. You're hoping for a miracle, but the German artillery says otherwise. Night falls, and you're hiding in a ditch. The forest eerily quiet except for distant moans and gunfire. The air smells of smoke and blood, and you're sharing a crust of bread with a trembling conscript. A quirky story floats up. Some Russians tried signaling with lanterns, only to guide German scouts right to them. Talk about a deadly misfire. You're thinking of those Somme trench rabbits here. The only animals are wolves, drawn by the carnage. The stars are faint through the trees, and you're shivering. Your coat torn. You're back on the move at dawn, the Germans tightening their grip. You're dodging a cavalry charge, horses thundering past as Russian lines collapse. The battle's a rout now, with survivors fleeing toward the border. Tannenberg's not just a defeat, it's a humiliation, crippling Russia's early war effort. You're starting to see why this battle haunts military history. Its lessons carved in blood. Another dark joke. What's a Tannenberg veteran's favorite hobby? Running. Because it's all they had left. You're exhausted, your legs burning. But the Germans are relentless, and you're just trying to stay one step ahead of the slaughter. You fled the shattered forests of Tannenberg, the German ambush fading as you find yourself on the banks of the Marne River. September 1914. You're trudging through French fields, the air thick with dust and the roar of artillery. You're with French and British troops, scrambling to halt a German advance toward Paris. Rifles crack, horses gallop, and you're dodging shell craters, wondering if you'll survive this desperate stand or just sink into the chalky soil. The First Battle of the Marne, fought from September 6 to 12, 1914, is a pivotal clash, stopping the German push just 30 miles from Paris and saving France from early defeat. Over 500,000 men clash, with 80,000 French casualties alone. You're in the thick of it, running alongside poilus in blue coats, their bayonets fixed as German shells churn the fields. A quirky tidbit: Paris taxis ferried 6,000 troops to the front, turning cabbies into unlikely heroes. Historians still argue whether the Marne's victory was Allied brilliance or German overreach. As their Schlieffen plan unraveled, you're sprinting beside a French soldier, his face smudged with dirt, firing his Liebel rifle at advancing Germans. The ground's a mess of mud and wheat, and you're tripping over a shattered cart. You're thinking of Tannenberg's forest traps. At least here, the open fields give you room to run, but nowhere to hide. A grim chuckle hits you. Why don't Marne soldiers play soccer? The field's too full of craters to kick a ball. The fighting's frantic. You see British Tommies form a firing line, their Lee Enfields spitting bullets as German Uhlans lancers on horseback charge through the haze. You're dodging a cavalry saber, its rider looming like a ghost from another era. Artillery pounds both sides, and you're diving into a ditch as a shell bursts nearby, showering you with dirt. The French counterattack with ferocity, their miracle of the Marne driven by sheer refusal to lose. You're wondering how anyone keeps charging when the air's alive with lead. Another joke: what's a Marne soldier's favorite ride? A Paris taxi, straight to the front. The battle's chaos is unrelenting. You're hauling ammo crates across a field, your back aching as French 75mm guns roar, their shells screaming overhead. The Germans dig in, their machine guns turning hedgerows into death traps. You're picturing Ypres gas clouds here. It's just bullets and shrapnel. but the terror's no less real. A soldier next to you collapses, and you drag him to cover, his blood staining your hands. You're hoping the line holds, but the German push feels unstoppable. Night falls, and you're crouched in a makeshift trench. The river's gurgle drowned out by gunfire. The air smells of gunpowder and sweat. And you're sharing a canteen with a British corporal, his accent thick with exhaustion. A quirky story floats up: some French troops used bicycles to scout, pedaling through shell fire like the world's worst delivery job. You're thinking of those Gallipoli jammed tin bombs here. It's all bayonets and desperation. The stars flicker through smoke, and you're shivering, your uniform damp with river mist. You're back in the fight at dawn. The Allies pushing hard to drive the Germans back. You're weaving through a vineyard, vines tangled with barbed wire. As French artillery hammers German positions, the battle turns, the Germans retreating across the Marne. But the cost is staggering: fields littered with bodies, villages burned. You're starting to see why this battle's called a miracle, though it feels more like survival than victory. Another dark joke: what's a Marne veteran's favorite hobby? Hijing. Because it's all they did. You're exhausted, your boots heavy with mud, but the line holds, and you're just praying you'll see Paris before the next fight. You've left the Marne's desperate fields behind, the echo of French taxis fading as you sink into the quagmire of Passchendaele. July 1917. You're knee-deep in Belgian mud, rain hammering your helmet, as British troops slog through a swampy hell. The air smells of rot and cordite, artillery thundering so loud your bones ache. You're clutching a rifle, slipping in slime, and wondering if you'll drown in the muck before a bullet finds you. The Third Battle of Ypres, often called Passchendaele, rages from July to November 1917, aiming to break German lines and seize Belgian ports. It costs over 500,000 casualties, with rain and shell fire turning fields into a liquid graveyard. You're in the Menin Road sector, where every step is a battle against mud that swallows boots, guns, even men. A quirky tidbit: soldiers used wooden duckboards to cross the mire, but slip off, and you're done, some drowned in craters. Historians still argue whether Passchendaele's gains, mere miles, were worth the apocalyptic cost or just Haig's stubborn folly. You're trudging beside a Tommy, his face caked with sludge, his Lee Enfield slung over his shoulder. Shells burst overhead, spraying mud like shrapnel, and you're dodging craters deep enough to hide a tank. You're thinking of the Marne's open fields dry compared to this soup. A grim chuckle hits you. Why don't Passchendaele soldiers play hopscotch? The board's underwater, and so are you. Your rifle's useless, clogged with mud, and you're praying it doesn't jam when the Germans counterattack. The fighting's a nightmare. You see British troops charge across duckboards, only to be cut down by German machine guns nestled in concrete pillboxes. The mud's a killer: men sink, trapped, as shells churn the ground into a slurry. You're hauling a wounded mate, his weight dragging you down, but abandoning him's not an option. You're picturing Ypres' gas clouds. At least gas didn't pull you under like this muck. Another joke: what's a Passchendaele soldier's favorite dance? The one where you don't slip into a crater. The battle grinds on, rain relentless. You're weaving through a shattered village, its church steeple a jagged ruin. Artillery pounds both sides, British 18-pounders answering German howitzers. You're diving for cover as a shell explodes, the blast sucking air from your lungs. Some soldiers, shell-shocked, wander into no man's land, lost in the haze. You're wondering how anyone keeps going when the ground itself is the enemy. A Canadian unit pushes past, their faces grim, aiming for a ridge that's barely a hill but costs thousands of lives. Night falls, and you're crouched on a duckboard, the mud gurgling below like a living thing. The air's thick with damp and despair, and you're sharing a soggy cigarette with a Scottish private, his kilt heavy with slime. A quirky story floats up some troops tied messages to pigeons, but the birds often drowned in the rain communication as doomed as the men. You're thinking of those Tannenberg icons here. Faith's just a prayer muttered between shells. The stars are gone, drowned by clouds, and you're shivering. Your coat soaked through. You're back in the slog at dawn. The British pushing toward Passchendaele village, a name that's more a curse than a place. You're dodging a German barrage, the mud slowing you to a crawl. The line creeps forward, but every yard feels like a mile. Paid in blood and exhaustion, you're starting to see why Passchendaele's a byword for futility. It's mud a monument to war's waste. Another dark joke, what's a Passchendaele veteran's favorite hobby? Staying dry, because it's a dream they'll never have. You're bone-tired, your boots cemented with mud, but the guns keep roaring, and you're just trying to keep your head above the mire. You've dragged yourself out of Passchendaele's suffocating mud, the quagmire's grip fading as you find yourself on the turbulent North Sea. May 1916. You're aboard a British dreadnought, the deck pitching under your feet, as the Battle of Jutland erupts in a storm of steel and smoke. The air smells of oil and gunpowder, the horizon alive with flashes from German battleships. You're gripping a rail, heart pounding, as shells scream overhead, and you're wondering if you'll survive this naval clash or sink into the icy deep. The Battle of Jutland, fought May 31st to June 1st, 1916, is the largest naval engagement of World War I, pitting Britain's Grand Fleet against Germany's High Seas Fleet. With over 250 ships and 100,000 men, you're on HMS Warspite, dodging massive shell splashes that drench the deck. The battle sees 14 British and 11 German ships sunk, with over 9,000 sailors lost. A quirky tidbit, some British sailors painted their ship's guns red to track which fired style points in the middle of chaos. Historians still argue whether Jutland was a British victory, maintaining naval dominance, or a German tactical win, sinking more tonnage. You're scrambling across the deck, the ship shuddering as its 15-inch guns roar, hurling shells the size of small cars. A German destroyer looms through the fog, its torpedoes slicing the water like sharks. You're thinking of Passchendaele's mud, at least here. You're dry, but the sea's just as unforgiving. A grim chuckle hits you. Why don't Jutland sailors play battleship? They're living it, and losing's not a game. Your ears ring from the gunfire, and you're praying the next shell doesn't find your ship. The battle's a chaotic dance of steel giants. You see HMS Invincible explode, a fireball lighting the gray sea, gone in seconds with 1,000 men. You're dodging sparks as gunners reload, their faces blackened by soot. British battlecruisers are fast, but fragile. Their armor no match for German shells. You're running to a damage control station, hauling hoses as water floods a compartment. You're picturing Gallipoli's cliffs brutal, but at least you could run. Here, there's only the ship or the sea. Another joke, what's a Jutland sailor's favorite weather? Anything but a storm that hides the enemy. The fighting rages through dusk. You're watching signal flags flap. Orders shouted over the din of turbines and guns. German ships, led by Scheer, maneuver like wolves, but Jellicoe's British fleet crosses their T, hammering them with broadsides. You're weaving through smoke, the air thick with the stench of burning coal. Some sailors, trapped below, bang on hatches as compartments flood. You're wondering how anyone stays calm when the ship could be your coffin. A destroyer cuts past, launching torpedoes that miss by inches, and you're holding your breath. Night falls, and you're on watch. The sea black, except for distant muzzle flashes. The air's cold, salt stinging your face, and you're sharing a mug of tea with a gunner, his hands shaking. A quirky story floats up some sailors tossed messages in bottles overboard, hoping for rescue that never came. You're thinking of those Ypres gas masks here. The only mask is courage, and it's wearing thin. The stars are hidden by smoke, and you're shivering. Your oilskin's slick with spray. You're back in action at dawn. The fleet's still trading blows. You're dodging a shell splash, the water erupting like a geyser. Jutland's no clear win, both sides limp away, claiming victory, but Britain keeps control of the seas. You're starting to see why this battle's a turning point, proving naval power's brutal cost. Another dark joke. What's a Jutland veteran's favorite hobby? Swimming. Because it's their only escape plan. You're exhausted, your hands raw from gripping rails. But the sea's still churning, and you're just praying your ship stays afloat. You've sailed away from Jutland's thundering seas. The crash of dreadnoughts fading as you find yourself in the rugged Alps of October 1917. You're retreating with Italian troops, your boots slipping on icy slopes, as the Battle of Caporetto unfolds in a chaotic rout. The air smells of pine and gunpowder. German and Austro-Hungarian forces pressing down from the mountains. You're clutching a rifle, heart racing as shells scream overhead, and you're wondering if you'll escape this alpine nightmare or be crushed in the stampede. The Battle of Caporetto, fought from October 24th to November 19th, 1917, is a devastating Italian defeat, with over 300,000 casualties, including 265,000 prisoners. You're in the Isonzo Valley, where German and Austro-Hungarian troops, using new infiltration tactics, shatter Italian lines. The retreat's a disaster, soldiers abandoning gear as they flee toward the Piave River. A quirky tidbit, some Italians threw their rifles into rivers to avoid capture, turning waterways into arsenals. Historians still argue whether Caporetto's collapse was due to poor Italian morale or the enemy's brilliant stormtrooper tactics. You're stumbling beside a young Italian conscript, his face pale with fear, as machine guns rattle from the ridges above. The mountains loom like silent giants, their peaks cloaked in mist. You're thinking of Jutland's open sea, at least there. You could see the enemy. Here. They're hidden in the fog, striking like ghosts. A grim chuckle hits you. Why don't Caporetto's soldiers play hide and seek? Because the Alps always give you away. Your rifle's heavy, and you're praying it doesn't jam as you scramble down a rocky path. The enemy's advance is relentless. You see German stormtroopers, gas masks dangling, lob grenades into Italian trenches, clearing them in seconds. You're dodging shrapnel, the ground trembling as artillery churns the slopes into rubble. The Italians try to hold, but their lines crumble. Men running or surrendering in droves. You're weaving through a shattered village, its church bell twisted by a shell. You're picturing Passchendaele's mud miserable, but flat. These mountains make every step a gamble. Another joke, what's an Italian soldier's favorite trail, one that leads home, fast. The retreat's a nightmare of chaos. You're crossing a frozen stream, your boots soaked, as panicked troops shove past, some tossing their packs to move faster. Civilians clog the roads, their carts piled with belongings, slowing everyone down. You're helping a wounded soldier, his arm bleeding through a makeshift bandage. But medics are nowhere near. You're wondering how anyone rallies when the enemy's this close. A German plane buzzes overhead, dropping leaflets urging surrender. Psychological warfare at its cheapest. Night falls, and you're hiding in a pine grove. The air's sharp with frost and fear. The distant crack of rifles mixes with the wail of retreating men. You're sharing a crust of bread with a grizzled sergeant. His eyes hollow. A quirky story floats up. Some Italians carved crosses into trees, praying for salvation that didn't come. You're thinking of those Ypres pigeon messages here. Even the birds seem too scared to fly. The stars glint through branches, and you're shivering, your coat thin against the alpine chill. You're back on the move at dawn, the enemy pressing closer. You're dodging a machine gun burst, diving behind a boulder as rocks splinter around you. The Italians regroup at the Piave, but Caporetto's Ascar Morale's broken, and the army's in tatters. You're starting to see why this battle's a lesson in hubris, showing what happens when plans meet reality. Another dark joke, what's a Caporetto veteran's favorite hobby? Running downhill, because it's all they did. You're exhausted, your legs burning, but the mountains offer no rest, and you're just trying to stay ahead of the route. You've stumbled out of Caporetto's icy retreat, the alpine chaos fading as you find yourself in the muddy fields of northern France. November 1917. You're with British troops at the Battle of Cambrai, the air thick with the roar of engines and the stench of diesel. Tanks clumsy, iron beasts rumble across no man's land, crushing barbed wire as German machine guns chatter. You're clutching a rifle, jogging behind a Mark IV tank, and wondering if these metal monsters will break the stalemate or just get you shelled faster. The Battle of Cambrai, fought from November 20th to December 7th, 1917, is the first major tank offensive in history, with 476 British tanks spearheading an attack on German lines. You're in the Hindenburg Line sector, where over 80,000 men clash, resulting in 45,000 casualties on each side. The tanks shock the Germans, smashing through trenches, but breakdowns and counterattacks stall the gains. A quirky tidbit, some tank crews kept canaries inside their machines to detect gas leaks. Birds in a steel cage, singing through the war. Historians still argue whether Cambrai proved tanks' potential or exposed their early limits, a gamble that didn't quite pay off. You're weaving through mud, the tank's treads churning sludge as it lumbers toward German positions. A Tommy next to you shouts over the din, his Lee Enfield ready for the infantry push. You're thinking of Caporetto's mountain route, at least here. The ground's flat, but the tanks draw fire like magnets. A grim chuckle hits you. Why don't Cambrai soldiers play darts? Because the tanks are bigger targets. Your boots are heavy with mud, and you're praying the tank doesn't bog down before you reach cover. The attack's a spectacle of steel and chaos. You see tanks crush wire entanglements, their 6-pounder guns blasting pillboxes. But some grind to a halt, tracks snapped or engines choked. German artillery answers, shells bursting with deafening cracks. And you're diving into a crater as shrapnel whistles past. You're picturing Jutland's dreadnoughts, massive. But at least they floated. These tanks sink in the mud like stones. A soldier stumbles, hit by a sniper, and you drag him behind the tank. His groans lost in the engine's roar. You're wondering how anyone trusts these machines when half stall before noon. The battle's a seesaw. You're pushing through a shattered village, its church steeple toppled, as British infantry swarm German trenches. The tanks open gaps, but German counterattacks with field guns shred the advance. You're dodging a machine gun burst, your heart pounding as you leap into a trench. The air's thick with smoke, and you're coughing, your rifle slick with sweat. You're thinking of Passchendaele's quagmire, this mud's no better. But the tanks give a flicker of hope. Another joke, what's a Cambrai soldier's favorite ride? A tank. Until it breaks down. Night falls, and you're crouched in a captured trench, the cold biting through your coat. The tanks are silent now, hulking shadows in the dark. And you're sharing a tin of bully beef with a Cockney private. His jokes as stale as the food. A quirky story floats up some tank crews name their machines like Pet's Hilda, Betsy hoping it brought luck. You're thinking of those Ypres urine-soaked gas masks here. The only mask is the grime on your face. The stars are dim through the haze, and you're shivering. The ground damp beneath you. You're back in the fight at dawn, the tanks grinding forward again. But German reinforcements hit hard, reclaiming ground. You're running beside a Mark IV, its armor dented as shells rain down. Cambrai's a glimpse of future wars, but its still trench hell gains are lost. And the mud claims as many as the guns. You're starting to see why this battle's a paradox, a bold leap, but a bloody stall. Another dark joke, what's a Cambrai veteran's favorite hobby? Wrenching. Because tanks need more fixing than fighting. You're exhausted, your hands raw from gripping your rifle. But the battle grinds on, and you're just trying to keep pace with the iron beasts. You've rolled away from Cambrai's clanking tanks, the rumble of engines fading as you find yourself in the shattered streets of Monzan, August 1914. You're with British troops, the air thick with smoke and the crack of rifles, as you hold a fragile line against a German onslaught. Your boots crunch on cobblestones, and you're clutching a Lee Enfield, heart pounding, as shells burst overhead. The Germans are closing in, and you're wondering if you'll stand your ground or join the retreat before the day's out. The Battle of Mons, fought on August 23, 1914, is the British Expeditionary Force's first major clash of the war, with 1,600 British casualties against a German force twice their size. You're in the Mons Condé Canal, where Tommies dig in, facing waves of German infantry. Their rapid rifle fire, 15 rounds a minute, creates a myth of machine guns, holding the line briefly before a retreat. A quirky tidbit, locals claimed an Angel of Mons appeared, a glowing figure saving British troops, likely just shell shock and hope. Historians still argue whether Mons was a tactical delay or a near disaster for the British, barely escaping encirclement. You're crouched behind a barricade, a Tommy next to you firing with mechanical precision, his face grim under a flat cap. The Germans advance in tight ranks, easy targets, but their numbers are overwhelming. You're thinking of Cambray's tank's high tech compared to this old school firefight. A grim chuckle hits you. Why don't Mons soldiers play chess? Every move's a check, and the board's on fire. Your rifle's hot, and you're praying it doesn't jam as shells churn the streets into rubble. The fighting's intense. Street by street, you see British gunners haul a 18-pounder into position, blasting German columns. But the enemy keeps coming, their bayonets glinting. You're dodging shrapnel, diving into a ditch as a shell explodes, showering you with dirt. The canal's a choke point, its bridges contested, and you're weaving through a wrecked brewery, its barrels splintered. You're picturing Tannenberg's forest route. This is tighter. Urban, but just as chaotic. Another joke, what's a Mons soldier's favorite street one, with an exit. The retreat begins as the Germans press harder. You're running through Mons' outskirts, dodging civilians fleeing with bundles of clothes. Your legs burn, and you're helping a wounded mate, his arm slung over your shoulder. The British fall back in good order, but it's a fighting retreat, with rearguard actions every mile. You're wondering how they keep discipline when the Germans are this close. A machine gun nest opens up, and you hit the dirt, praying you're not in its sights. Night falls, and you're in a makeshift camp, the air heavy with smoke and exhaustion. You're sharing a cigarette with a Lancashire private, his accent thick as he curses the Kaiser. A quirky story floats up. Some troops swore they heard ghostly pipers playing during the retreat. Boosting morale, probably just wind and wishful thinking. You're thinking of those Gallipoli jam tin bombs here. It's all rifles and grit. The stars are faint through the haze, and you're shivering, your uniform damp with sweat. You're back on the move at dawn, the Germans dogging your heels. You're covering a bridge, firing at shadows in the mist, as the British retreat toward the Marne. Mons is a small battle, but a big symbol, Britain's first stand, and nearly its last. You're starting to see why it's remembered as defiance against the odds, even if it meant running. Another dark joke. What's a Mons veteran's favorite hobby? Marching backward? Because it's all they did. You're bone tired, your hands raw from your rifle. But the war's just starting, and you're just trying to stay one step ahead of the German tide. You've slipped away from Mons' desperate streets, the crack of rifles fading as you find yourself in the rugged Isonzo Valley. June 1915. You're scrambling up a rocky alpine slope in northeastern Italy. The air's sharp with frost and gunpowder. You're with Italian troops, their breath steaming as they charge Austro-Hungarian trenches. Shells scream down from mountain peaks, and you're clutching a rifle, wondering if you'll survive this blood-soaked climb or tumble into a snowy ravine. The battles of the Isonzo, a series of 12 clashes from 1915 to 1917, pit Italy against Austria-Hungary along the Isonzo River, costing over 1 million combined casualties. You're in the first battle, where Italians hurl themselves at fortified positions, gaining yards at a horrific price. The jagged terrain cliffs, gorges, and icy streams makes every step deadly. A quirky tidbit, some Italian soldiers carried mandolins, strumming between assaults, as if music could soften the slaughter. Historians still argue whether the Isonzo offensives were strategic necessities or Cadorna's obsessive folly. Bleeding Italy dry for minimal gains. You're clawing up a slope beside an Italian Alpini, his feather-capped hat bobbing as he fires his Carcano rifle. Austro-Hungarian machine guns Perched in cliffside bunkers, spit bullets like hail, shredding the line. You're thinking of Mons's urban chaos, at least there. You had streets to duck into. Here, the mountains offer no cover. A grim chuckle hits you. Why don't Isanzo soldiers play rock climbing? Because the rocks shoot back. Your hands are numb from gripping frozen rocks, and you're praying your rifle doesn't slip down the slope. The fighting's brutal, a vertical meat grinder. You see Italians lob grenades into trenches, only to be driven back by counterattacks. Shells churn the snow into mud, and you're dodging shrapnel that carves grooves in the ice. The Austrians hold the high ground, their artillery pounding positions below with surgical precision. You're weaving through a boulder field, tripping over a discarded pack as a comrade falls. His scream echoing off the cliffs. You're picturing Cambrai's tanks useless here, where even mules struggle. Another joke, what's an Isanzo soldier's favorite view? Anything that isn't a machine gun nest. The battle's relentless, day after day. You're hauling ammo crates up a goat path. Your back screaming as avalanches, triggered by shell fire, rumble nearby. The Italians push again, aiming for peaks like Monte Nero. But the cost is staggering thousands, fall for a few rocky yards. You're wondering how anyone keeps climbing when the enemy's dug into the mountains like ticks. A sniper's bullet pings nearby, and you dive behind a rock, heart pounding, hoping you're not next. Night falls, and you're crouched in a shallow trench, the alpine chill cutting through your coat. The air smells of pine and blood, and you're sharing a crust of bread with a Venetian private, his eyes hollow. A quirky story floats up some Alpini tied bells to their gear to signal in blizzards, only to attract enemy fire. Bad luck dressed as tradition. You're thinking of those Tannenberg icons here. Faith's a muttered curse against the cold. The stars gleam like ice, and you're shivering. Your boots soaked with snowmelt. You're back in the fight at dawn, the Italians charging another ridge. You're dodging a grenade blast, the explosion showering you with gravel. The Isanzo's a graveyard of ambition, with bodies littering slopes like broken toys. You're starting to see why these battles broke Italy's spirit, each push bloodier than the last. Another dark joke, what's an Isanzo veteran's favorite hobby? Digging, because even the mountains need trenches. You're exhausted, your hands raw from climbing. But the peaks loom higher, and you're just trying to survive another bloody ascent. You've stumbled down from the Isanzo's icy slopes, the alpine slaughter fading as you find yourself in the muddy trenches of northern France. May 1915. You're with French troops at the Second Battle of the Ace. The air thick with the stench of damp earth and cordite. Shells scream overhead, shaking the ground as you clutch a level rifle, your boots sinking into slime. The Germans are dug in across no man's land, their machine guns chattering. And you're wondering if you'll survive this grinding stalemate or just vanish into the mud. The Second Battle of the Aisne, fought from April to May 1915, is a brutal chapter of the Western Front's trench warfare, costing over 180,000 French casualties in a failed push to break German lines. You're in the Chemin des Dames sector, where rolling hills hide fortified trenches and endless barbed wire. The French aim to smash through with artillery and mass assaults, but gains are measured in yards. A quirky tidbit, some French soldiers wore red trousers early in the war, making them easy targets fashioned as fatal as bullets. Historians still argue whether the Aisne offensives were doomed by poor planning or the sheer strength of German defenses. You're scrambling through a trench, the walls crumbling as a shell bursts nearby, showering you with dirt. A poilu next to you, his mustache caked with mud, fires blindly over the parapet. You're thinking of the Asanzo's rocky cliffs, at least there. You could see the enemy. Here, the trenches hide death until it's too late. A grim chuckle hits you. Why don't Eisen soldiers play checkers? The board's buried, and every jump's a bullet. Your rifle's slick with rain, and you're praying it fires when the whistle blows. The fighting's a relentless slog. You see French troops charge across no man's land, only to be cut down by German Maxims. Their bodies tangling in wire. Artillery pounds both sides, churning fields into a lunar mess of craters. You're dodging shrapnel, diving into a dugout as a shell explodes, the blast sucking air from your lungs. You're picturing Cambrais tanks useless in this quagmire, where men drown in mud as often as they fall to bullets. Another joke, what's an Eisen soldier's favorite season? Anything but spring, when the rain never stops. The battle drags on, each assault bloodier than the last. You're hauling sandbags to reinforce a crumbling trench, your arms aching as rain turns the ground to soup. The French push for Hill 108, a speck of dirt worth thousands of lives. But German counterattacks hold firm. You're weaving through a shattered orchard, its trees splintered by shells. As a comrade collapses, hit by a sniper, you drag him to cover, his groans lost in the artillery's roar. You're wondering how anyone keeps charging when every yard's a graveyard. Night falls, and you're crouched in a waterlogged dugout, the air heavy with mildew and despair. You're sharing a soggy cigarette with a French corporal, his eyes hollow as he mutters about Paris. A quirky story floats up some troops' carved love letters into trench walls, hoping someone would find them romance in the middle of hell. You're thinking of those Mons angel myths here. The only angels are the medics, and they're overwhelmed. The stars are hidden by clouds, and you're shivering. Your coat drenched. You're back in the fight at dawn. The French launching another assault. You're climbing over the parapet, heart pounding, as machine guns open up, stitching the mud with bullets. The Eisne's a symbol of the war's futility, endless attacks, endless losses, no breakthrough. You're starting to see why this battle's forgotten, overshadowed by bigger names, but just as deadly. Another dark joke. What's an Eisen veteran's favorite hobby? Waiting. Because that's all the war taught them. You're exhausted, your hands blistered, but the guns keep pounding, and you're just trying to survive another fruitless charge. You've crawled out of the Eisen's muddy trenches, the drone of artillery fading as you find yourself in the rolling fields of northern France. August 1918. You're charging with Allied troops, British, Australian, Canadian at the Battle of Amiens, the air alive with the roar of tanks and the crack of rifles. Dust chokes your throat, and you're clutching a Lee Enfield, running behind a Whippet tank as German lines buckle. You're wondering if this is the push that ends the war or just another bloody sprint to nowhere. The Battle of Amiens, fought from August 8th to 11th, 1918, marks the start of the 100 Days Offensive, a series of Allied victories that forced Germany towards surrender. Over 75,000 Allied troops, supported by 500 tanks and 2,000 aircraft, smashed through the Hindenburg Line, capturing 12,000 prisoners in days. You're in the Amiens sector, where coordinated assaults overwhelm German defenses, a rare glimpse of mobile warfare after years of stalemate. A quirky tidbit some Australian troops used captured German bugles to confuse enemy signals. Musical sabotage in the chaos. Historians still argue whether Amiens' success was due to Allied innovation or German exhaustion after years of attrition. You're sprinting beside a Canadian infantryman, his bayonet fixed, as tanks crush barbed wire ahead. The ground scarred but firm, a relief after the ice and sludge. German machine guns sputter, but they're outflanked, their trenches overrun by waves of infantry. You're thinking of the Isonzo's alpine hell, at least here. You're not climbing cliffs under fire. A grim chuckle hits you. Why don't Amiens soldiers play rugby? The field's too busy with tanks scoring tries. Your rifle's light in your hands, and you're praying the tanks keep rolling before the Germans regroup. The attack's a whirlwind of steel and speed. You see Whippet tanks race forward, their machine guns blazing, while Sopwith camels buzz overhead, strafing German positions. You're dodging a shell burst, the explosion kicking up dirt like a geyser. The Allies' planned tanks, infantry, artillery, and air support in sync feels like a new kind of war. Less trench, more blitz. You're weaving through a shattered village, its church spire leaning like a drunk. As a German soldier surrenders, hands high. You're picturing Cambrai' tank gamble this time. It's working, but the cost is still blood. Another joke, what's an Amiens soldier's favorite speed? Full throttle. Like the tanks they chase. The battle surges on, relentless. You're hauling ammo crates to a forward post. Your arms burning as artillery pounds, retreating Germans. Prisoners stream past, their faces gaunt, morale broken. You're wondering how the Allies keep this pace 4 years of war. Yet they're pushing like it's day one. A machine gun nest opens up, and you dive into a ditch. Heart pounding as a tank lumbers over, silencing it. You're thinking of Passchendaele's mud. This dry ground's a blessing, even if it's littered with shell holes. Night falls, and you're in a captured trench, the air smelling of oil and victory. You're sharing a tin of jam with an Aussie digger, his grin wide despite the dust on his face. A quirky story floats up. Some Canadians painted kangaroos on their tanks for luck, a nod to their Aussie mates. You're thinking of those Ypres pigeon messages here. Wireless radios crackle, a modern edge in an old war. The stars shine clear, and you're exhausted. Your boots caked with dirt. But there's a spark of hope in the air. You're back in the push at dawn, the Allies driving deeper. You're running through a wheat field, tanks flanking you. As German resistance crumbles, Amiens isn't just a battle. It's the war's turning point, showing Germany's end is near. You're starting to see why it's called the Black Day for the German army, their spirit breaking under Allied steel. Another dark joke, what's an Amiens veteran's favorite hobby? Chasing. Because the Germans finally ran. You're bone-tired, your hands raw, but the momentum's unstoppable. And you're just trying to keep up with the tide that might end this war. You've surged out of Amiens' triumphant fields, the rumble of tanks fading as you stand on a quiet hill overlooking the scarred landscapes of 1918. The air is still, carrying faint echoes of gunfire and the weight of 4 years of slaughter. You're alone now, reflecting on World War I's brutal battles, Somme, Verdun, Gallipoli, and more, each a testament to human endurance and loss. Your boots crunch on gravel, and you're wondering if the world can heal from such carnage, or if these echoes will linger forever. World War I, from 1914 to 1918, claims over 16 million lives. reshaping nations and redrawing maps in blood. The armistice of November 11th, 1918 ends the fighting. But its battles leave scars, physical, emotional, political, that define the 20th century. You're imagining the Western Front, a 400-mile gash of trenches from Belgium to Switzerland, where millions fell for yards of mud. A quirky tidbit: some soldiers grew poppies in trench gardens, their red blooms a grim irony amid the gray devastation. Historians still argue whether the war's outcome, Allied victory at a staggering cost, was inevitable or a failure of diplomacy that could have been avoided. You're walking through a shattered village, its skeletal houses silent, a reminder of Passchendaele's quagmire or Caporetto's route. Each battle you've survived: Marne's defiance, Jutland's naval clash. Amiens' breakthrough tells a story of courage and futility. You're thinking of those Ypres gas masks, crude but life-saving, or the Esonzo mandolins, strumming hope in hell. A grim chuckle hits you. Why don't WWI soldiers write novels? Their stories are too heavy for paper. The wind carries a faint whiff of cordite, and you're tracing a finger over a rusted helmet half buried in the dirt. The war's legacy is everywhere. You see it in abandoned trenches, now softening with grass, or in memorials listing names that stretch like litanies. The Somme first day, Verdun's endless grind, Mons' early stand, they're not just battles, but mirrors of a world pushed to its breaking point. You're picturing Tannenberg's frantic retreat chaos compared to Amiens' precision, yet all part of the same bloody thread. Another dark joke. What's a WWI veteran's favorite silence? The kind that follows the last shell. You're starting to feel the weight of these stories. Each one a life, a loss, a lesson. The hill feels like a vantage point over history. You're imagining the men who fought Poilus, Tommies, Anzacs, Cossacks, their faces blurred by mud and time. The war's tools, tanks, gas, dreadnoughts changed how we fight. But the human cost stays raw. You're thinking of those Cambrai canaries, singing in steel cages, or the Mons angel myths. Hope in a hopeless place. The battles taught strategy, but also sacrifice, showing what happens when nations bet everything on war. You're wondering if peace can last when the ground's still soaked with memory. The sky darkens, and you're sitting now. The hills quiet, wrapping around you. The war's over, but its shadows linger in treaties, in grief, in poppies that bloom where blood fell. You're exhausted, your mind heavy with images of trenches, cliffs, and seas. But there's a strange calm in understanding it all. Those Marne taxis, those Jutland bottles, they're fragments of a world that fought, survived, and somehow moved on. Another grim chuckle. What's a WWI historian's favorite puzzle? One where the pieces don't fit. Just like the war. Wind down as you rest on this hill. The wind softens, carrying away the distant rumble of guns and the cries of battles long past. The stars emerge, their light gentle, like a promise of quiet after years of chaos. You let the weight of the Somme's mud, Verdun's fire, and Gallipoli's cliffs slip from your shoulders, each breath slower, deeper, as the war fades into whispers. The trenches, tanks, and poppies dissolve into a warm haze, leaving only calm. You're safe now, wrapped in the present, where the only fight is for a cozy blanket. Sink into the stillness. Let the fans hum lull you, and drift gently into sleep, the war's echoes fading like a dream.